Okay, everyone, welcome to this edition of Embodied Awakening Live, which is a series we've been doing for a couple of months now. Okay, we've got Adrienne is just joining us. Yay. So we'll have another Shakti. That's good. It's always nice to have a balance of Shaktis. Hi, Adrienne.
Hi, Pete. How are you doing?
Good.
Hello, everybody.
We're just starting.
Great. Lovely.
So yeah, welcome everyone. And in this session, we're very happy to invite Peter Littlejohn Cook back. Very good friend and collaborator here in Portugal. And last time, I think it was 2 weeks ago, with Peter, and it was into the theme of what is Tantra and what makes a practice tantric, truly tantric. And it was very interesting and illuminating, particularly because Peter's really delved into the tradition and illuminated the difference between what's called right hand and left hand Tantra in the traditions, and then the differences between what we could call traditional Tantra and what's now called Neo-Tantra. And yeah, there's a lot that came out of that was very interesting. And so for this one, I got in touch with Peter. I asked him what theme he would be interested to go into. So Peter came up with the idea of calling it generating bliss. So let's begin with a short meditation, and then we'll go into that topic of what is bliss and is it possible to generate it? Okay.
Great. Maybe we'll generate some bliss during the meditation. So I invite you to bring awareness to the breath and to the body. Just listening to the breath and noticing the sensations in the body. And bringing the awareness to where the body is in touch with the earth element. Notice all the parts of the body that are supported. So including also your back and your arms and hands if they're supported in this moment. So not just the floor, the chair as support, but really noticing the feeling of supportedness associated with the earth element. And dropping into that while finding a natural upward expression of the life force, of the aliveness, of the awareness, an upwardness that rises naturally like a flower reaching for the light. And I invite you to let the body be loose as it is in this restfulness and awareness. Let there be a softness in the body that allows easily for movement at the physical level, movement of the physical body, but also movement of energy, of sensations, of breath, and even of sound. Maybe you'll sigh, yawn. Just let whatever the body's intelligence comes up with be naturally, spontaneously expressed. If you'll feel more at ease to let go without everyone hearing you, you can switch off your microphone, but I do encourage you to just let sound arise spontaneously as you exhale, as you move, as you find what is comfortable for you in this moment. And from this place of connectedness with the earth element, you can take your attention deeper into the connectedness with the field of aliveness, the field of Earth's intelligence, the field of nature, the space that is alive with energy, prana, chi. You breathe it in, but also you're embedded in this field. Your energy body, your subtle body is also interacting with this greater field, and you can allow yourself to rest in that also, just as the physical body is resting in its support. Allow yourself to feel supported by the field of aliveness and intelligence, supported and nourished, enlivened, empowered. And you can allow each breath to also be a receiving of aliveness, a receiving of nourishment, even an expression of connectedness with the source of life, a direct communion with the source, receiving grace with every inhalation, receiving blessings, and again, receiving empowerment, receiving whatever qualities are needed for you in this moment from the source of existence. Remembering to allow your body to be soft, available for movement, making space. Receiving blessings with the inhalation and giving more space with every exhalation, releasing whatever is able to dissolve, creating new space to receive. And what you give with your exhalation is also, you could say, received gracefully by the energetic ecosystem, transmuted. So giving and receiving in grace. And even while you have this awareness of the connection with Earth through the physical sensation of support from the Earth element below, even as you have this connectedness with a greater field of aliveness, even as you sustain that awareness or cultivate that awareness, you can also bring attention into the space of the heart, if you like, bringing your hand to your chest, so your resting awareness in the heart space inviting for the heart qualities to come into the foreground, into expression. Like you're nurturing the heart qualities with your attention. Your attention is inviting the blooming of the heart qualities. Qualities like joy, like courage, confidence, kindness, compassion, and curiosity, and openness to life, a readiness to engage with life. And also qualities in the heart like generosity and gratitude. And you may find that even a sense of gratitude for just beingness itself, for the present moment in its richness. And as this simple moment is felt in its richness, you can experience the energy of the smile as also a quality of the heart. And from the sense of appreciation and openness, you may find the subtlest sense of joy, the subtlest sense of even of pleasure, of enjoyment. Not necessarily even localized in the heart, but just permeating existence itself. Mm. Mm. And even though we're focusing here on cultivating what could be thought of as positive qualities, we're also creating the space for whatever is present, whatever is perhaps normally under the surface and contracted in this space of openness. There's also room for transmutation, for digesting whatever has been under too much pressure to be digested. So embracing what is, and in the embrace, finding energy transforming. And you may find that this quality of witnessing, this quality of attention, is also like a recognition. So even as we, in some sense, are generating a well-being by restful awareness, by nourishing the heart qualities, we're also allowing for something to be revealed in this quality of witnessing, an underlying quality that has perhaps just been not noticed through our busyness, or through habitual tension. So I invite you to allow for the sense of connectedness to remain, the sense of deep presence with these heart qualities deeply alive, even radiating perhaps a heat, a warmth, a light, a glow that fills the inner space, permeating the whole body and even overflowing, outshining the physical form. So I invite you to allow for this quality of presence to be available, whether we are in this practice or in conversation, whether you are sitting here in this gathering together tonight, or whether you are with other people, by yourself, in whatever circumstances. I invite you to allow for this quality of presence to arise naturally, spontaneously, to be revealed, to be available, to be recognized and welcomed. And when you do open your eyes, I invite you to see from this place of connectedness with also that heart quality of curiosity, as if you're seeing not what is familiar, but what is mysterious. And allowing yourself even to be touched in all your senses by grace. So not only this radiance from the heart emanating from within, but allowing yourself to perhaps recognize this quality of aliveness, joy, love, to be an all-encompassing reality, even reaching you through your senses, through your engagement with the world, your play with senses and forms, with the movement of life. And if you feel like sharing a word, a string of words to express what's alive for you in this moment, feel free, without needing to analyze, but allowing expression to arise.
Openness.
Openness. Thank you, Sandy.
Love, bliss.
Love, bliss. Thank you, Pete.
Divine bliss.
Divine bliss. Thanks, Juan Pedro.
Well, can be a sort of quiet contentment.
Quiet contentment. Thank you, Martin.
Playfulness.
Playfulness. Thank you, Lisa. Would anyone else like to share?
Can go with expansiveness.
Expansiveness. Thanks, Axel.
Hello, Vania. Can you hear? Just joined.
Yeah, welcome, Lenya.
Oh.
Pete, would you like to? There was you'd suggested doing a sharing.
Yeah.
As we start, would you like to do that now?
Just as an intro. Just wanted to check, Andre. Can you hear? Do you have a video?
Yes, I'm here listening.
Okay. Where are you joining us from?
I'm from Portugal, but I'm traveling, so that's why I have my camera off. Sorry.
Yeah, welcome. And Vania, can you hear?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Do you have video?
Yes, but I'm not. Okay, I will show myself.
Okay. I can see you a little bit in the dark there.
Yes. Okay, here I am.
Welcome.
It's always better to see some faces.
I know.
Yeah, so well, I really appreciated your guidance there, Peter, through the meditation, because I think particularly in the way you guided it, you really magnified the quality of bliss, which is what we're going to explore. But to give a bit of context to the inquiry, I just wanted to share from my own experience in terms of delving into spirituality and also Indian or Buddhist spirituality initially, is there can often be a lot of emphasis on what we could call being or consciousness as being the ultimate truth and reality. But often bliss is overlooked. So, for example, in India, one of the descriptions of awakened or enlightened consciousness is Sat Chitananda, which translates as being, consciousness, bliss. And definitely, at least in my experience, I was a Buddhist for many years and then involved in spiritual practices and experiments broadly in the Vedantic tradition. And so I through those practices and orientations, I came upon a profound awakening to what we could call consciousness or being itself, the witness consciousness, presence, as Peter was describing. and the recognition that that presence, that beingness, that consciousness is always already the case. And the apparent entity called Pete, with his mind and his emotions and his personal story, you know, that's all going up and down and changing. And, you know, and I began to go through a process of releasing my identification with this Pete character, is the historical person and his mind and emotions, through a process of meditation inquiry, and become more and more established in this recognition, which I'm symbolizing with my open hand, of I am not the mind, I am not the emotions, I am not my personal history, story, I am consciousness itself, the light of consciousness itself, which is always already the context, we could say, in which the whole movie of Pete and Andre and Sandy and JP and Martin is appearing. But then if I look back, I can see there was generally one of the pitfalls or dangers in this kind of approach, when bliss is not fully embraced or magnified, is what can lead to some degree of dissociation from the play of embodiment and phenomena. So I almost became a Buddhist monk when I was 27, because I would do these long retreats and I would experience such profound bliss, actually, that all I wanted really to do was to continue meditating or live in a circumstance where I could give myself entirely to that. And the little story I wanted to share is I remember after one of those retreats, when I was completely blissful, speaking to a monk, actually, a senior monk, about my experience on the retreat. And I was very happy. I was very passionate. I was very ecstatic. And he basically admonished me. He basically said, no, don't get focused on all of that. Or you're starting to experience meditation madness. He said it's just going to arise and cease. All feelings, all states, or, you know, arise and cease. So just stay with pure consciousness. And I remember even back then, this was years ago, I just had a sense like, there's something didn't quite add up here, because I just felt, yes, that was true. There was being, there was consciousness, but there was also joy, happiness, love, you know, ecstasy. And this was not really accounted for in that context. And then I began to go through this crisis, because I saw, well, actually, while there was a lot of clarity and compassion and pure living demonstrated in the tradition and in the monastery, there wasn't a lot of bliss. There wasn't a lot of ecstasy. There wasn't a lot of spontaneous joy. So that kind of set me on a path, you know, of you know, what wanting to discover whatever it would mean for there to be a whole bodily embrace of what we could call awakening. And so one of the questions that I think is a good one to maybe begin with, because we're calling this generating bliss, is I think why Ananda or bliss is often overlooked in the traditions is it's presumed that bliss is a feeling state that comes and goes, and therefore it's not ultimate in the same way that our sense of being and consciousness may be. And I just want to say something briefly about my sense and experience of this, and then hand it over to Peter. It's interesting, as far as I can tell from the translation of the word. So obviously the word bliss in English carries this connotation of deep happiness, maybe even ecstasy. But I have read also that the Sanskrit term ananda also has this quality of equanimity. So bliss, true bliss, doesn't have an opposite. So when we use the word happiness in English, we can always say I'm happy and then I'm unhappy. But there is really no such thing as unbliss. At least I've never heard of it. So whatever bliss is pointing to something that transcends opposites and therefore is not just a positive feeling or feeling state. So it's my intuition, my understanding that bliss is ever present, actually, just as consciousness, my being and consciousness is. But bliss becomes diminished when there's a presumption of being a separate self, and when as soon as there's a presumption of being a separate self and there's a sense of lack, then one is looking again for the good feeling or for happiness. So I just want to share a moment. Last night I was looking into this because, as you can probably tell, I'm coming out of having a bad flu this week. And last night I hardly slept. I was up most of the night with coughing fits like that all night. And I was, at the same time, I was making use of this experience, and I was contemplating, well, here's the body mind going through a very difficult process, doesn't feel very good. And I was looking at it, but my experience and bliss were still completely obvious. Yeah, I am the witness, consciousness itself observing this coughing fit. And then I started looking into this question of bliss, and I was saying, well, what about bliss? Is that absent? Because I really don't feel good right now. But then as soon as, even in the midst of feeling lousy, I actually did some of the things that Peter guided us into in the meditation, actually took the space to breathe a bit more deeply, and actually centered myself more in my heart space. And even in the midst of my body being convulsing in coughing, just like this, started to get in touch with this sense of radiance and fullness. But I wouldn't say at the same time that I started to feel good, in terms of feeling good, feeling bad. But it was a deep sense of ease and radiance that actually, as lousy as this feels, everything is deeply good. So anyway, just wanted to share a little bit from my own experience. And so maybe you could start, Peter, by saying a little bit about what you understand the nature of bliss to be. And I know you know a little bit about the tradition also. Yeah. And what would it mean to generate bliss, but not from a disposition of seeking or presuming the absence of it?
Yeah, great. So I think the same question, or the same principle, right, could be brought into any spiritual practice, really. The risk, let's say, or the tendency there is to kind of be in a contracted state, and really identifying with the contracted state while idealizing a good state, a better state, a state of liberation, a state of bliss, a state of joy and communion with the divine. And it's natural that we try to seek this better state, but there may be unconsciously a kind of, in a strange way, an attachment to the state that we are feeling in the moment, in some sense, as being, that's what's real, and you're seeking something else that you hope will arise in the future. And as long as that's the underlying dynamic, it makes that future state difficult to actually achieve because of the nature of grasping for it. And part of the, like you said, Pete, the teaching that you find in India very present, this description of the enlightened state, liberated state, or our natural state as Satchitananda, as existence, consciousness, bliss. The reminder that the teaching brings, that this is not a reward of good behavior. It's not what you'll get if you're very disciplined, if you do this, that, and the other, but your natural state. If you anchor that, it doesn't mean that you therefore don't practice anything, which might be what the rational mind would figure out. Well, if that's my natural state, it makes no sense to do anything because it's what I am, it's who I am, so there's nothing to do. And sometimes there's a bit of a short circuit that the mind will do, and it won't really understand. If that's my natural state, if enlightenment is my natural state, whether you call it Buddha nature, Satchitananda, Shiva consciousness, whatever, then rationally it seems meaningless to do anything. And there's truth in that too, which is if you fully, let's say, open to that realization now, if this moment is an expression of that realization, then there is even no impulse even in this moment to seek something else. So if your practice, whatever it may be, whether it's a meditation practice, a walking practice, a dancing practice, a breathing practice, if the practice itself is imbued with this conviction, you could call it, that your true nature is, whether we call it bliss, connectedness, grace, whatever word is meaningful for you. If there is a conviction, let's say, that that's actually the ground of existence itself, it can help to engage in practice without projecting a hope for something in the future, in some other moment, some other space, but instead be a way in which you bring recognition into the moment of what is. So whereas in a lot of Western traditions, you find that there's a kind of an ongoing saga, the story of good versus evil, you know, as the kind of storyline of religion, you could say. In the Indian tradition, which is a sort of a broad way of referring to a multitude of interlaced traditions, really, but you could say that there is a different dynamic at play. There is often the reference to knowledge, vidya, and ignorance, avidya. And in English, the word ignorance can tend to be used as a criticism, as a demeaning way to describe people that we see ourselves as superior to, or they're ignorant. But if we look at just the literal meaning of ignorance, it means that something is not being recognized. It's being ignored. So in contrast to recognition, to knowing and experiencing. So it's not a battle of good versus evil, but of reality versus ignoring reality, being, you could say, distracted from reality, being in a bubble of our ideas and beliefs and identifications and so on. And so this practice is not so much about trying to get to a future state, but to recognize that we might be contracted into into fixations of some kind. And as we relax, those fixations can just naturally drop away, and a recognition naturally arises that has as its quality a joyfulness, a sense of you could say gratitude for existence, communion, grace, bliss. So if you, and even the word practice is funny because it implies that you're rehearsing for something. Like the word practice can mean it's not now, you're practicing for something else, so it's for the real thing eventually. You know, we use the word practice for a rehearsal, you know. And so it's funny that that word can also trick us into this projection of whatever practice we're doing, it's because we're not yet at the real thing. So we can turn in our sadhana, our spiritual discipline or spiritual, the way that we engage, we can experience it as a kind of a celebration, as a kind of a prayer, as a joyful acknowledgement of reality rather than a yearning for it, which is again like a kind of projecting of it away from us. We can think of it as a celebration of it. And then again, we're inviting the directness to be recognized, the immediacy to be recognized. Would anyone like to share any reflections or questions? Is what's being shared meaningful to you, or confusing, or obvious, or does it go against what your convictions or your experience are? Because that's an interesting place of exploration as well, where you feel like, no, this doesn't make sense to me. This isn't what I've learned, or this isn't what I experienced. This is not my understanding. That's, you know, I welcome that challenge of seeing, well, what's the disconnect? I'll share. If feel free to jump in, anyone, if anything comes up. But I meanwhile, while no one is saying anything, I'll share. Part of my life journey involved a kind of, you could say, an awakening of profound curiosity about reality, because I had this sense of a recognition that the mind doesn't allow us really to see things as they are. The mind is always a contractive action, right? So whatever comes to attention is a kind of contraction. We focus on a part of the whole, and that the mind seems to do that as part of its function, is to split things into pieces and then try to create maps and stories of the whole by breaking things into pieces first. And so you could say the intuition that somehow a state of consciousness that was not mind stuff would be a revelatory state. And so when I read the life story of the Buddha, and how he basically eventually sat under the, was it the banyan? Not, I can't remember now if it was a banyan tree. He sat and he basically just, with absolute conviction, said, "I'm not getting up from here until I attain liberation and a stage of true realization of my true nature and the true nature of things." And with that absolute conviction, you could say, sat in stillness, in silence, in meditation. And the going through the processes of recognizing activities of the mind, the challenges of the mind, and ultimately coming to a space of consciousness beyond mind, beyond all that fragmentation associated with mind stuff. And when I read that, it felt like a recognition, like, I knew it. I knew it was possible. And this story kind of gives the you could say a biography of this discovery. And then I came across, in my kind of mid to late teens, a book called The Perennial Philosophy by Aldous Huxley, where he speaks of how across all cultures, I mean, all cultures with their spiritual traditions, their mystics, there was always a common experience, independently of whatever symbols they used to represent their teachings and whatever names they give to God or goddess or gods, and whatever structures that they created around their religious whatever frameworks they created, there was a common experience of awakening that involved a recognition of an underlying grace. We could call it love. The statement, God is love. In many different languages and in different periods of history, it was as if that same recognition was arising. The underlying reality is in some sense love. But we could call it grace, bliss, unconditional connectedness. And it's very easy to get caught up in the details of a tradition, the frameworks, the representations and the names and so on, and to not see the universal experience that's at the heart of the awakening, the realization.
Peter, on that subject, because that's something that I guess I experience or feel like in a lot of spiritual groups or in workshops or in teacher trainings or whatever, is that there's loads of focus on knowledge and yeah, and there's less embodiment, and it feels like people get, and you've said it as well, people get really stuck on that stuff, and so it almost feels like that also like blocks people. But how do we move into a more heart space? Like, why are we struggling with that?
Yeah, well, you each may have different answers, and I'd love to hear from Pete as well on this, and anyone else who'd like to share. My answer, summarized, I guess, would be that we have created habits. We've installed, you could say, systems into our nervous system. We've got whole sort of to a great extent, we're like machines physiologically, and those machines become wired a certain way, and they're wired strongly based on repetition. And so this is one reason why usually people think of spirituality not as just being a transmission of the truth and then it's done, because of the structures that are still there. Even if there's a sense of recognition, like, that makes sense, that's meaningful, or even, yeah, I've had that experience, still we easily fall back into what were familiar ways of feeling and reacting and interpreting, because there are structures physiologically existing, that are like a filter through which we are experiencing the world.
And why do you think we're so concerned or obsessed with structures? Like, where does that come from?
Well, what I'm referring to now as the structures are physiological. They're not conceptual. They're like the way your nervous system has been configured, the way your neural networks have become configured. But but I can still answer your question in a different way, which is, to the extent that we feel unsafe, we will hold on to familiar structures. And to the extent that we feel profoundly safe, we will open up to what is new. We'll effectively open up to the present moment. We'll open up to life and infinite possibilities. The present moment is infinite, you could say, right? Every single moment has a sort of an infinity to it. But through our mental filter, we make it linear. We make it fit into a narrative. We make it fit into a process where we think of how it fits into a before and an after. And that's a part of the contractive state of consciousness that's associated with some degree of, you could say, existential anxiety. It's one of the characteristics that, thanks for joining us, Arthur. Bye. One of the characteristics of the human condition, and I don't mean the nature of a human being, but the familiar condition of the human being, conditioned state, right? But it's this existential sense of feeling separate, feeling disconnected, and trying to resolve the anxiety that comes up, even if it's not an obvious anxiety where someone would acknowledge, like, I feel anxiety day to day, even if it's a completely unacknowledged anxiety, it's part of the human condition, as long as there is a sense of separation associated with the identity, right? When you say I, and your belief about yourself is that you are a separate entity, that's the spark of anxiety. And so it's also the spark of all the mental contraction and the consolidation of structures and the, you could say, attachment to old structures rather than the state of openness, the fluidity associated with presence.
I think it's worth pointing out that it's not, as far as I can see, it's not just a sort of individual quirk. I mean, the whole of the society and those that are trying to control us do it through fear. So fear is the currency of, as far as I can see, most governments, most powers that be these days. So it's not just a strange quirk that we don't feel safe. There's a massive industry telling us we're not safe all the time, or that we need to buy something or do something in order to be safe or happy. And the other aspect, I think, is that our culture, well, particularly American culture, which tends to dominate the English-speaking world, is incredibly individualistic in a way that traditional African culture isn't. So I think there's two things that take this just beyond the personal level to the societal level, really.
Yeah.
Here it's everywhere these days, to an astonishing degree.
Yeah. So for sure, there
Can I
are
throw out one thing?
cultural patterns.
Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add to that. Yeah, the fear is definitely there. I'm moving through a period right now where I'm realizing that these structures are, it's, how do I put it? We're rewarded tacitly for being in our heads rather than our hearts.
Mhm.
And all of the systems around us, whether we're dealing with explicit fear or not, it's just almost in the air and the water around us that we should be using our heads and thinking. And the heart, well, if that agrees, well, so much the better, but we're not going to prioritize that now, are we? So that's along the lines of what we're talking about. I think that makes it difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, very much agree, Axel. Yeah, one thing I could add to this, going back to your original question, Lisa, because I felt what you were speaking to is how you were saying there's recognition that can occur conceptually, if you like, through meditation, inquiry, and then there's the recognition of what we can call the heart, which has a the feeling dimension to it, a devotional dimension. And yeah, just chiming in with this, looking at our culture, Western culture. I know in my whole journey, as I know is true for Peter and for many people, India has had such a profound impact and influence. And there's many reasons why, but for me, that it's to do with this matter of devotion. And it's quite something when so when we have the East coming to the West, and there I was getting interested in meditation, and being a Western sort of educated young man, I immediately began to have a recognition, a form of recognition, a degree of recognition that was, as Peter was saying, this sense, yeah, this makes sense. So the Buddha's fundamental teaching made sense to me. There was a certain logic, and logic is more profound than just rationality. In other words, there's a heart logic, an intuitive logic. Yeah, this makes sense. And so I can see there was a degree of recognition. And I see this occur a lot with Westerners who get into Indian Advaita non-dual teachings, because our whole society and is as Axel was just saying, it's oriented towards navigating through the head center as opposed to the heart center. Things like meditation and inquiry, they can be very useful and take us perhaps very far up to a certain point.
Mhm.
But then when you go to places like India and you see that, and obviously I'm talking about the true Indian culture, and which India is being westernized like everywhere else on the planet. But I just began to recognize, wow, there's a heart, there's a devotional surrender to the mystery of life. I love the way you called it, Peter, at the end, of prayer. That meditation is also prayer that in that context, because you're devoted to and giving yourself to the mystery that is always already the case. You have no doubt that the divine is the case. And that's always my experience whenever I go to India and step off the plane. It's like, here is a place where the divine is recognized as being real. Even in the middle of the cities, crazy cities, it's like everybody knows God is real, all the different forms of God. And so just to tie this in with what I really wanted to communicate is, I think the challenge this is why I love this topic also about bliss and generating bliss, is that it's very common, I feel, for a lot of Westerners, even who are very sincere in their spiritual practice, to be missing this aspect of heart devotion. And that heart devotion has to do with very much what Peter was guiding us into in the meditation with bliss, with it. And then you were talking about embodiment, because I feel the embodiment aspect can only come when there is that heart devotional aspect coming online. We could broadly talk about it as head, heart center, and then hara, or just and then we obviously can talk about transmuting sexuality. But if there isn't this awakening to a deeply devotional, surrendered response to the wonder of life and existence, our spirituality will inevitably remain in our head to some degree, somehow disembodied. And I feel so much this is why this more tantric, and you could say more feminine, the feminine representing everything that's been denied and dissociated in patriarchal religion, East and West. Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with that for us as Westerners, getting more interested in devotion as opposed to accumulating more spiritual knowledge.
Yeah.
That makes sense? That resonate?
Yes, very much.
I would like to ask something.
Yeah, go ahead.
So before I ask the question, let me go back to the meditation, which was really beautiful. I had an amazing experience as you were describing, and there was a moment where I was kind of reliving some events from my past where I felt some pain, where some people hurt me emotional, physically. Different expressions were happening in those moments. And I was feeling that pain, and that at the same time, it felt that there was some relaxation, no attachment to that. And there was kind of a compassion to both. And when I mean both, to myself and to the one that was doing the action that hurt me. And my question is, does bliss has to have a certain state, like being happy, joyful, feeling love? Can we feel bliss while feeling pain, or other states that are not so kind of beautiful and the ones that we more want to have?
I think Pete referred to that as well when he was describing the experience with the coughing fit and finding an underlying you could say an underlying peace. I'm putting my own words into it now, but something that helped to make it a less contractive experience. And there's always,
let me just share about that contemplation. So there I was coughing away, right? And so something I contemplate a lot is death. And I just thought, it just came to me like, what if I was going to die tonight? What if I'm 80 years old and I'm having a coughing fit like this and I'm just going to die? But the contemplation of death, it really brought forward how none of us know what circumstance we're going to be in when we're dying. We all hope and pray we're not going to be killed in a car crash or something like that. But you see, what disposition are we going to be in when we're going to leave this behind? And it just really that somehow brought this dimension of bliss, or the immediacy of bliss, as you were saying, Peter, not being reaching a state that's presumed to be absent. And it was something about that surrender. It's the surrender just into this experience of physical pain, of, you know, whatever it would be, JP, that might arise, you know. Then what, you know, if one can surrender completely to the pain, the difficult emotion, the discomfort, then the resistance to it is dissolved, and then we somehow make us, you know, when we dissolve that sense of contraction, and one could say one gets in touch with a dimension of bliss that but it's not about changing one's feeling state. And yet at the same time, something does change, but it's not to do with wanting to be, you know, it's to do with the deep acceptance of what is and feeling through it. Maybe that's the best way to put it. Feeling through the coughing fit, you know, feeling through the pain, feeling through, you know, whatever it is. Yeah. What does that resonate, Peter?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it also brings in another, or brings up for me another aspect of this, I think is nice to explore, which is the question: if bliss is our natural state, if it's the underlying reality, existence, consciousness, bliss, why do things appear not to be bliss? Why do we ever not feel it? You know, how does this contracting, how does this ignorance arise? And as Martin said, there are cultural aspects to this as well. You know, there are cultural pressures, there are cultural narratives, there are ways in which we are taught to be distracted and contracted. So there is a degree of physiological contraction that takes place through, let's say, undigested pain, trauma. There's a certain amount of contraction that takes place physiologically, emotionally. And then there's also let's say, we tie ourselves up in narratives of danger and chronically extend the anxiety through believing that we're constantly in danger, even when we're not in danger in the present moment. We end up feeling as if we're always in danger. And this may sound strange, but I mean at a subtle level, you know, a sort of rather than there being the underlying conviction of your true nature as bliss, there is more like an underlying conviction that life is dangerous and you are separate and you have to fight for your survival or you just won't make it. You know, it's like that's the underlying conviction that we get programmed into us. And so what I wanted to bring in is also what does generating bliss do? Is it just a momentary reminder of reality, of our true nature? And I would say there's another aspect to it, that generating bliss is like a way to dissolve the conditioning, the structures that have built up, the structures that we revert back to. And by structures here, I'm meaning emotional complexes that we that we've identified with, psycho-emotional states that are familiar. So these as structures, by generating blissful quality of presence. Think of it as a practice, if you like, a technique, a meditation, or just a quality of presence, right? It doesn't have to have a specific form to it, but it can be something that you just remember to bring into the quality of attention, because we can be contracted in our quality of attention. You could say even physiologically, the posture of tension, right? And we can undo that pattern in the moment of tension and bring ourselves into a softness and a sense of feeling physiologically, also expressing the feeling of being safe in this moment, being open, being connected. And so as an underlying configuration that facilitates the feeling recognition of bliss. And this can also help to dissolve the structures, change the pattern, set a new framework, so the neurological structures, the biochemistry, that's the biochemistry of movement and action and reactivity and tension, all that biochemistry gets to be different as we are relaxing and experiencing a sense of safety. So we are, you could say, bathing in a different biochemistry, right? Physiologically, we're generating the physiological conditions that in some sense you could say are aligned with the recognition feeling of bliss. So I'm not saying bliss is entirely physiological, right? But I am saying that there is a physiological state in which we're predisposed to be contracted and feeling anxious, and there's a physiological state in which we're predisposed to experience a recognition of bliss. You're going to say something, Martin?
Yeah, I think you've sort of helped a bit. I think if we focus on generating bliss, I think that's a bit of a cul-de-sac, really, because if bliss is our true nature, it's just getting out of our own way to recognize what's already always the case. Yeah, I mean, this is why there's texts in the tradition like the Pratyabhinyahridyam, which is the doctrine of self-recognition. So it's and I think the closer physiological thing to the bliss state is in Western psychology they call the flow state.
Yeah.
And that's characterized by lack of division. There isn't, I am now going to go into the flow state. It happens when there's a kind of unity. If I'm trying to do anything, there's me and what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. The problem is that. So it's more about how to get out of the way, how to just be in a state of unity and recognizing what's already always the case.
Yeah, Martin. Yeah, can I say something about to this? Because on the one hand, we could say it's a problem, but on the other hand, maybe it's not a problem. Because it being a problem would also imply some sense of dilemma, and that we're on one side of the, let's call it the water. There's a phrase that Adi Dar would use all the time. He'd say, you can't get there from here. Oh no, you can't get here from there. Like, in other words, you can't get to already being consciousness and bliss from the ego, right? It cannot be done, right? So as Peter was saying earlier, I appreciated how you were saying, so that's a truth, but then what a lot of more conceptually based Westerners do with that truth, and you see this a lot in Neo-Advaita, is like, oh, well, there's nothing to do, there's nothing to practice, and people presume they have this kind of concept, they convince themselves conceptually that they're already enlightened. And actually it's a big delusion, it's because it's like, well, they won't make any effort or do any practice because it's presumed to be ego-based. So that's one side of the error. But at the same time, I was feeling another way to look at this whole notion of generating bliss, and we're always using words that tend to be very clumsy anyway. It reminds me of a can't remember. There's a Zen. I can't remember his name. I think it's Suzuki Roshi. And he said, he basically said that enlightenment was an accident. Basically, again, implying that it's a non-linear recognition event. But he said, so someone said, well, why are we meditating then? You know, and he said this to make ourselves more accident prone. And that's really the way I see and look at this, you know, yeah, because that's why I said at the beginning, generating bliss, you know, how do we approach that from not from an egoic sense of trying to make something happen. But I think if we approach these because it might, at times when we're really entrenched in anxiety and ego, maybe a technique is just very useful, you know. We also have to have that humility sometimes. But maybe it's just having the spirit of like, let's just be open to whatever can assist us in being accident prone. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, that's how I feel into this, and at the same time appreciating that it's always if one is conveying or teaching any kind of meditation or even technique like this, that one is always affirming that this true nature is already the case. Because that's where I agree, you know, it's really about dissolving and dismantling and softening all the conditioned presumptions or the structures, as you put it, Peter, that make it seem as if that condition is not already the case. So it's like an uncovering of what's already there.
Yeah. Yeah. And also in relation to what you said, Martin, the, you know, getting out of the way, like it can be understood on different levels, you know, and let's say that can be responded to in different ways, this getting out of the way. It can be, like Pete was saying, there's a sort of a neo-Advaita tendency to say, oh, if someone's expressing something that is in any way not, let's say, an expression of your liberated state, to put it down to, oh, you're in your mind, it's just thoughts, and it can be ultimately an invitation to dissociate from what you're feeling in this moment, because what you're feeling in this moment doesn't reflect reality. So just dissociate from it in the hope that by dissociating from what you're feeling, you'll come to reality. And the tantric approach, rather than being dissociative, is integrative. And so it recognizes that there may be some nourishment for the mind, some conceptual frameworks that will be supportive in some sense, that will be more conducive to becoming accident prone, right? If your underlying conviction is I'm a separate entity that is bound by suffering, and by nature I am, you know, full of faults. If that's your sort of underlying mental conviction, you could replace it with I am Shiva, and repeat that, you know, with conviction, and maybe that will be a more helpful way to occupy your attention than the underlying narrative that's playing out. But also in the tantric path, as well as the, let's say, teachings, right? The conceptual replacement of unhelpful ways that you tie yourself up, ways that these binding ideas can be unbound through these other still concepts, right? To a great extent, words, concepts, images, stories. But there is a different quality of awareness associated with the unbinding of those mental structures, those mental loops, you know, the breaking of them. And also the tantric path brings in the acknowledgement that your body is also creating, contributing to your quality of your experience in the moment. It's not only what you believe or what you say or what you've been told or what you've acquired conceptually as belief. And so the Neo-Advaita idea of, well, just, you know, replace that thought with something else, or just get rid of your thoughts and you'll be liberated. It's ignoring the embodied, somatized outcome of a lifetime or generations of contraction that is being habitually referenced as reality, as the filter through which we look out into the world and feel into the world. And so getting out of the way is also engaging with this physical play of energy, this physical matrix, but also this field of energy, to engage with it in a way that the bliss is embodied. It is felt at a physical level. It's not just felt when we disengage from the body, when we sit in stillness and then we go into a quiet sense of peace, but actually generated in the body. Because there are, like I said, I'm not putting bliss down to purely a physiological phenomenon, but we do have oxytocin and so on, right? We have a biochemical state in which we feel joyful and blissful and connected and open. It's conducive to being in the space of the heart. So as we generate those states, which are physiological, and really there isn't an absolute cut, right, between what is physiological and what is our state of consciousness. These are, like Pete was saying, clumsy words. But as we generate what we could clumsily call physiological states of bliss, we're reprogramming all those structures so that physiological blissful states or quality of being, that is more accessible, because that's the new pattern, right? That's the pattern, rather than the old patterns being so very present as our default. So it's like cultivating this garden. The garden isn't you. Reality doesn't depend on any of this, on any of the practice, but the feeling recognition of it by attuning this inner space, by allowing it to become this radiant place of peace.
May I say something about this? Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated, yeah. Just to maybe say that my experience as a woman in my 60s who has been, I'm going to lots of story here, but general feeling of being having had this feeling of being very dissociated from my sexual energy and my sexual organs and things like this. But I have two things I wanted to say that I experienced a lot of bliss. And one was in 2017, I fell and I gave myself a hairline fracture. And for that summer, I was in absolute bliss because I was on crutches and I just surrendered, and there wasn't much I could do except heal. And all of my stories, all of my narrative, all my doings and beings and projects and everything had to go on the back burner. So that was a really blissful experience for me. And then I stepped back into my life and all the anxieties would come up again, as they do. And I'm currently in an extremely pressurized, busy period of my life, which culminates the week leading up to Easter. But I'm continually in bliss. Well, no, I don't want to say bliss. It feels a little bit pretentious slightly. But I am really deeply, there's an underlying deep contentment. And for me, the reason for that seems to be that as my healing through my life has progressed, very slowly, very incrementally, just doing that hard work, healing and devotion and prayer and all kinds of workshops, everything. I've done it all. And I found myself last year at a retreat, the first time ever I went to a tantric retreat. And this is where I met Pete Bampton. But again, I can't go into the whole story about what happened, but it was incredibly profound. Yeah, I won't go into it. It's too much to really say. But what I experienced then and since was, well, first of all, I realized I had an experience of what was behind the shield of my heart. We did a little bit of work around the shield, and it was simply two things, not feeling safe and fear of intimacy. So that was great. I just thought, okay, so that's what's on the inside of that shield. But also I had a very physical experience of reclaiming my lost part, the lost part of myself. We did a wonderful movement, breathwork kind of tantra. I don't know what it was. Tandava, she called it. It was fantastic. And I've been doing that quite regularly since. But essentially, since that workshop, so much of my story has just fallen away. I have a real sense of freedom, a real sense of adventure as I go into this next phase of my life. And it's just, I just wanted to report that back because it ties in with some of what you've been saying and I've been listening to. I really love the word devotion, and I think it's very much lost in our current Western world. And surrender, of course, yes, but surrender to what? And to me, it's surrender to the divine. And yeah, so I just wanted to share that. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just aware of the time, so we come up to 8:30 now. So guess we should think about coming to an end. But yeah, really beautiful. Thank you, Adrienne, and yeah, really appreciate everything you shared at the end there, Peter. I feel also, Adrienne, your sharing brought out what Peter's saying about how did you put it? Practice being creating another pattern, another physiological, psychophysical pattern. And I just think that's a really useful way to look at spiritual practice. Instead of it being about getting somewhere higher or greater than where I already am, is actually, no, I'm practicing because I already intuit and presume and am convinced that I am whole, and I want to make myself more accident prone by working on working to change the patterns or to undermine the patterns that limit, because it's just very moving to. So you said you've done all kinds of practices and workshops. You obviously you've had a strong conviction over a long period of time to free yourself, and now you're really reaping the fruits of that commitment.
Yeah.
And so through that you can see that this is a process. It's an awakening process. And yeah, beautiful.
Thanks, Pete.
Yeah.
And you said bliss, and then you said, oh, maybe contentment. And I don't think that we should underestimate the beauty of contentment, because it's a sense of fullness. And you could say enoughness, and with enoughness, because enoughness doesn't sound very poetic and beautiful, right? Enoughness, but it feels like wholeness, which ultimately allows us to be in a sense of connectedness, communion, rather than in a desperately trying to complete ourselves through something else. Contentment is the, let's say, the portal into bliss. Yeah, Martin, you said contentment when you described what you felt after the meditation. Yeah, that one of my favorite words. I think it sounds so beautiful in Sanskrit. Santosha, contentment.
Yeah.
Osha.
Yeah, and I think that etymologically it's connected to the word shanti. You know, I don't know for sure, but I think santosha and shanti are somehow, certainly they evoke the same sense of contentment, peace. We didn't really have time to explore it. I remembered now towards the end this other theme that could be interesting to explore at some point, maybe another day or in some context. But the fact that we may not only be, let's say, finding it difficult to access a feeling of bliss through contraction and busyness and anxiety and so on, and the feeling of unsafety, restlessness, that there may also be a whole other thing that we haven't talked about, which is the fear of bliss, the fear of the intensity associated with which takes us out of the rational state of calculating our every move and figuring out how we relate to the world and respond to our problems. Bliss is a falling away of all of our strategies. That's associated also inevitably, right? And so we may be far too attached to our certainties to allow ourselves to experience this all-consuming bliss. For everything to be that's familiar to be dissolved, we may be far too attached to what's familiar, including our spiritual convictions, you know, our spiritual beliefs that we've taken as solid and things to hold on to not be given away even to bliss. And
Well, yeah, well, maybe we should do that in another session.
yeah, okay.
I think you touched on that, Adrienne, when you said you saw that shield, which had to do with fear of intimacy.
Yeah.
Because one way to define the intensity of bliss, right, is we become intimate with all and everything. You know, but on a felt level, not just on a intuitive conceptual level. But yeah, that is overwhelming. Okay, everyone. Well, thanks for joining.
Beautiful to be with you.
Thank you.
And
Station Pete.
yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
I'm not sure what we're doing next week. Gillian's cooking up an idea. I think a woman called Paula is coming on and she's going to share some of her experience in the world of Tantra. But anyway, thank you very much and look forward to having you on again, Peter.
Great. It'll be a pleasure.
Everyone.
Big hug.
Ciao.
Big hug.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.